What is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear Switzerland? Does a picture of beautiful glaciers, bars of chocolate, or their prestigious watches enter your imagination? Well, Switzerland is so much more. It has become Europe's beacon of peace, having embraced a policy of armed neutrality that very few have adopted. But what made the respected nation follow this route? Although in the past, as in the last couple hundred years, the Swiss Confederacy has had its fair share of wars, it has committed itself to a middle ground, advocating for a non-aggressive stance. Along the way, it has become a role model for other countries like Turkmenistan and Sweden. But if you thought that being a neutral actor meant that the Swiss are helpless, then you are mistaken. Most of its 8 million plus population have received military training and are fully loaded with ammunition in their homes. Its army remains one of the most respected defense forces. Global Firepower, a statistic-based website measuring military analytics of nations, rates the Swiss Army with a near-perfect 0.5259, ranking them 30 out of 138 in the world, which is not bad for the small nation. The Swiss are so militarily prepared that if a nuclear bomb exploded, the built-in Swiss shelters would accommodate 114% of its population. That means the Swiss can house themselves and some of its own neighbors. Were the Swiss always neutral? To answer this, we'll have to trace back their war history to 1315, when the old Swiss Confederacy fought against the Archduchess of Austria at the Battle of Morgarten. The men of Schweiz, or Schweiz in German, Suisse in French, or Svizzera in Italian, were just unarmed commoners, albeit equipped with halberds. You know, those menacing axe blades on long sticks that the Swiss Guard is known for. Even with just these, they managed to kill more than 1,500 Austrian knights. The victory at Morgarten ensured a massive win for the Swiss and led to the establishment of the Confederation, since the Austrians could no longer claim jurisdiction of their territory. However, 200 years later, in 1515, the Swiss took part in another battle, this time against the French at the Battle of Marignano in a village today known as Melegano, 10 miles southeast of Milan. The French, who were under the leadership of King Francis I, claimed victory. This victory gave Francis great pride, as he was prone to lose his battles. With the help of Allied Venice, the French crossed the Alps and captured the Italian cavalry, and after 8 hours of combat, the Swiss retreated and lost, giving birth to the principle of armed neutrality. It wouldn't be for another 300 years until the policy would be officially recognized by the Congress of Vienna in 1815, with the aim of recognizing a balance of power in Europe. Since then, for over 200 years, the Swiss have never participated in any war. It hasn't been easy, however, for the Swiss to maintain their neutrality. On June 28, 1914, geopolitical hell broke out across Europe when the Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife were assassinated by a Serbian national. A month later, Austria-Hungary retaliated with a declaration of war on Serbia. With these events, World War I officially started, engulfing all of Europe, and at the center of it all, both politically and geographically, lay Switzerland. The hapless country stood sandwiched between the Central Powers, Germany, Austria, and Bulgaria, on the one side, and the Entente, Great Britain, France, Russia, and eventually the US, on the other. Germany to the north, France to the west, Italy to the south, and Austria to the east. Within months of the First World War breaking out, Switzerland deployed 220,000 men under General Ulrich along its borders in Jura, France, and on their eastern and southern borders to guard the frontier. Despite its defensive posture, Switzerland still maintained its neutrality and chose to never partake in the conflict. But humans are humans. German-speaking Swiss secretly and quite loyally favored the Central Powers, while the French-speaking and Italian populations sided with the Allies. Throughout the war, the hostile parties crossed Swiss borders at least 1,000 times, mostly at the post at Dreispruchen-Pietz in the Eastern Alps. The nations that were involved in the war agreed they would continue without force as they passed Swiss territory in order to abide by the Swiss stance of non-interference. Due to this, Switzerland became a haven for refugees, thinkers, and politicians. It even accepted 68,000 French, British, and German prisoners of war to their mountain resorts. But things boiled down after the war. The issue of Swiss neutrality has regularly come into question in Europe, as many translate Swiss neutrality into passivity. But does Swiss permanent neutrality mean that they will just sit back during an attack? The Swiss constitution stipulates that the Federal Council can take any necessary measure to protect the internal security and independence of the peoples of Switzerland. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the onslaught of global challenges such as terror attacks, Switzerland has had to adjust its policies, participating in wars actively in other ways. It has joined in non-military sanctions throughout the European Union, negotiating and participating in mediation talks to enhance peace in the world. But being a neutral state, Switzerland takes steps to ensure its long-standing principle of impartiality. But how does it manage to do so? On October 18, 1907, the Hague Convention authorized the law of neutrality, a set of regulations that describe the rules and mandates of neutral countries. The main rules are the following: abstaining from war engagement, ensuring its defense, not supplying armed troops to hostile states, ensuring equity when dealing with the exportation of war materials, and disallowing hostile states from using neutral territory. These guidelines explain why Switzerland has not partaken in any of the two world wars or participated in any foreign disputes and conflicts. Switzerland's constitution proclaims the protection of Swiss independence. Concerning foreign policy, their charter provides 5 aims that include the following areas: promoting peace and harmony amongst nations, promoting the respect of human rights, aiding against poverty, preserving natural resources and advancing Swiss economic interests overseas. With these objectives, Switzerland has avoided joining military, economic, and political alliances. But towards the end of the 20th century, the Swiss widened the extent to which their trademark neutrality remains uncompromised. In December 1996, the Swiss joined NATO's Partnership for Peace. In May 1997, they joined Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council, another NATO initiative. In 1986, Swiss voters, in a referendum, rejected UN membership on a 3-to-1 margin. On March 3, 2002, Switzerland joined the UN in a tight referendum contest, making Switzerland the first nation to join the UN via a referendum. Additionally, many humanitarian organizations have their roots in Switzerland, like the Red Cross Society, originally beginning in Switzerland promoting humanitarianism and aiding in safeguarding health and human life. Switzerland also hosts several headquarters of multiple international organizations and non-governmental organizations, with Geneva alone being home to over 40 organizations, some including the World Health Organization, WHO, the World Trade Organization, WTO, and the Aga Khan Foundation. What is the other side of the Swiss neutralism? Neutrality in Switzerland faces some issues due to the neutral path the nation follows. Let's delve into some of them, shall we? Switzerland's status as a refuge is well known, with several immigrants seeking asylum in the country, especially during the 20th century. In 1965, over 14,000 Hungarian nationals received residential status in Switzerland. 3 years later, over 12,000 Czechoslovakian immigrants arrived in the country as refugee seekers. Both scenarios are a result of uprisings in their respective countries. Between 1973 and 1990, over 5,000 Chilean refugees fled from Augusto Pinochet's dictatorship to Switzerland. Over the next 12 years, nearly 150,000 immigrants fled from Bosnia and Kosovo due to ongoing wars and found new life in Switzerland. With an influx of refugees, integration problems have occurred due to the different diversities. Plus, with most of the asylum seekers being of working age, unemployment has become a major issue. When it comes to Swiss banking, the difference between privacy and secrecy is blurred. In 1934, Switzerland formalized its banking laws with the Federal Act on Banks and Saving Banks, making it a criminal offense to reveal an account holder's name. Prospective clients often assume that when dealing with a Swiss bank, their financial activities will be kept confidential, which is far from the case. Swiss banks conduct compliance checks to ensure that account holders abide by the laws set, which involve the monitoring of international fund transfers against global most wanted lists and providing information to authorized law enforcement professionals. Swiss banks regularly perform financial inquiries into new clients, including audits, ensuring money deposited is not from illegal sources. When an inspection finds a potential or current customer linked to illegal activity, a Swiss judge allows for a police investigation that investigates money laundering, tax fraud, or terrorist association. So it's safe to say that the belief that terrorists, drug barons, and criminals exploit the unique Swiss banking laws to conceal their assets is a myth. Not many would agree with their methods of policing. But if other countries did the same and minded their own business, the world nations would learn to cooperate and live in harmony. Instead of rushing fast onto foreign borders and territories, we all could live without the threat of another deadly war. Today, the concept of neutrality no longer means passivity, as it used to. The Swiss are much more about playing an active role in peace and mediation processes, as well as promoting human rights, despite its well-respected protection force. Switzerland remains adamant about not pursuing an aggressive foreign policy with a hidden agenda. The effects of its neutrality are, however, bringing a lot of questions, with most people viewing them as a government without a coherent foreign policy. What do you think about its foreign policy? Tell us in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button